All right, hello everyone. Here we are back for a Golf Clash tutorial here, and we are at the Porthello Cove, hole number 6. This is one of the more complicated holes in really the entire game. The biggest issue is the change of surfaces. If you guys haven't seen this, anytime you pull up over this territory, it's kind of the highest ground on the entire hole. Makes for kind of changes your adjustment a bit. This, fairway down here is a little bit lower. It's kind of on the same height as this. Very, very similar anyway. And then as you pull down, this way, you kind of go to the lowest of the ground. And when you pull towards these lower surfaces, it kind of tends to change your adjustment a little bit. So it's very wind specific how much you're going to need to overplay these shots. But let's, start to tackle a little bit. Now, the biggest issue with this hole is, let me, try to give you kind of an idea of where we're looking at for, it should be somewhere around here for your wood to driver line. Should be somewhere in that ballpark, especially with a power 3 ball. So let's talk about the woods. The one thing that's kind of nice about this is it does still kind of set up pretty well for all the drivers in the game for the most part. As long as you don't have a POC 4, you should be good. So first, priority here. I kind of want to give the edge to Thor Hammer here. It's very, very close. But what I like about it is that full backspin option kind of gives you a capability to either A, pick up an easy win on somebody who makes a miss hit where you go second. You can easily win with a Thor 6, Thor 7 shot just by hitting, just kind of a full backspin off the front of this fairway. It'll be easy. The only problem is your limited curl with it to get the ball back. So in the event that you have a left or right wind, you may not be able to get it back towards the hole, even with max curl. However, you should be able to get it, somewhere around this fringe pretty well, which, is very easy, straightforward, easy to win. So next, I'll put a POC right below this, 6 or 7, and then a POC 5 is going to be right below. I wouldn't even contemplate bringing Apocalypse anything lower. I'd switch to Extra Mile for sure. And it would really only technically need to be like a 6 or a 7, for example. But hopefully by this point in the game, Tour 12, you have an Extra Mile 7 at least to roll with here. And there is, a slight capability of potentially getting either a case 2 type with a sniper. And, I'll put Cat 7 right below this, Cat 6 or 7. And for the sniper, as long as you have an 8, you should be good. Similarly, you don't need a 7 here, so this is kind of a little misleading. But as long as you have a 6, you should be able to, have a very capable shot on certain tailwinds. Mostly, primarily straight tailwinds are going to be kind of the ones we're talking about. So let's start to talk about this hole a little bit. It's very, very complicated. And even from time to time, I'll forget something or, make kind of a tragic mistake because it's just kind of one of the most complicated, holes they've ever designed. It may even be the most complicated. So there's a lot of things that you need to consider, and most of it has to do with moving to different elevations of the target, which kind of tends to make things a little bit tougher. So let's talk about the main shot right here. And we'll do this with, maybe some pink here. So we'll pretty much be using, one of these clubs. So, my overall is to try to land a little bit towards the top of this fairway, just a little bit. Usually try to stay back a ring or two at least. So, with a Thor hammer, a little bit lower accuracy, this might be about 2 rings from the top. The goal here is to hopefully land here, get the second hop to be on the fairway ideally, but there's not a lot of room. So it's very, very hard to have distance control to do that. Alternatively, if you land on the green, you'll probably roll through. But if you're able to hit that fairway, you can easily kind of make it wind up and check up and be relatively close to the hole. So let's talk about the situations at hand, because it's not very easy to do this at all. So for the side wind case, I'll usually try to shoot for right around 4, very, very close to 4. Now, you will have to make slight variations to this because, if it's just a little bit of a headwind, that enough is going to be, make this very, very challenging for you to be able to pull off 4. So getting it to that level where you're using 4 can't always necessarily be done. So, with that in mind, let's just kind of sub-interval a little bit with these headwind cases. And, I'll kind of put a 3.5 in here, a 3, for example. But at the same time, this could even be 2.5 to 3. This could be 2.5 to 3 as well. And on this headwind case specifically, anytime that you kind of start to get into kind of this territory right here, anything inside this zone can be, it's really going to be wind specific, but this can be, kind of a death trap. You might even almost need topspin, to be honest with you. So, the range here, let's just say, we'll put 0 to 2 in this range and these are all backspin amounts. And it's really just going to be kind of determined upon how much of a wind you actually get. Because you can have as low as, I'd say, 9, 8, which would be somewhat manageable. But then you could also have it as, high as, say, 14 miles per hour straight in the face. It's not going to be, a very fun wind to play. And as I mentioned, you may even need to go into topspin in that situation. I really haven't had enough, exposure to every single wind scenario for this hole yet. I have maxed this tour, but in terms of, playing every single type, I've only probably played a couple hundred. I've probably played about 200 matches in Tour 12. So my, knowledge is kind of intermediate to advanced. I kind of understand the shots, but, there's still quite a few scenarios. You probably need, 1,000 playthroughs at least before you really start to really master a lot of the situations at hand. So let's talk about a couple things here. And one is this side wind case. So let's just kind of highlight one of these cases here, like this one specifically, where it's kind of shooting over towards 4 miles per hour. So I'll kind of highlight this with this purple arrow here. And that means that we're going to be moving our target up to this higher ground. So here comes the problem. So you put it up into this higher ground. You really need to pull back just slightly, a few rings. This is going to make the ball launch beyond this target when you move up to this higher ground because of the elevation change. So if you don't shift this down just slightly, you will carry potentially past this fairway. Whereas down here, the same thing doesn't apply. You don't need to do any of that overplay. So let's talk a little bit while we're on this side wind. Let's start to draw these in here. So you got side, you got tail, and you got headwind. So here's the side wind case that we're talking. You know, I really don't have kind of a set procedure with how I'm going to do this. So I'll try to keep my purple pen on because this is kind of an isolated case. So a POC 5 is going to be pretty much the same rings as a POC 6. So let's say, for example, you know, we had a 10 wind. I'm going to play at least 10 rings here. So we're looking at probably at least plus 40% in this situation, in this purple case. So max-ish plus 40. Going to be in the ballpark of this for this one isolated case. However, on the other side, you know, I might take off a little bit of this. I might not go max plus 40 because when I'm at this lower ground, the ball doesn't quite carry as far. So I could potentially, you know, take off an extra ring, for example. So somewhere in the ballpark of, I would say, you know, let me get this other case in here with a different color pen. So maybe a blue, and we'll just say, you know, anywhere pulling down in here, you know, we'll just kind of highlight this case right here. Or no, that's a tailwind. It's this one. Let me erase all that. So in this blue case right here, where we're kind of pulling back at this angle, you know, you won't have to worry about that launch effect taking place. You do move to a little bit lower ground, but it's kind of negligible, which will kind of make the ball land just a tiny bit shorter. So one of the things you could do is you could shift it up, but you don't need to do it very much. And as I mentioned, you know, you won't need to quite do the overplay that you need to do on the other. So I'm thinking, you know, max 20 to 25% in this case. In the case where you move down to the lower ground here. So similarly here, with this other tailwind, you're actually going to stay on this surface for this other tailwind. If it gets up very, very high, I'll usually club down. But if it stays kind of manageable, 10 or less, then I'll just kind of put it at min club. But I'll still play it, you know, very close to this, you know, max plus 20, 30%. Like very, 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 very downhill. So, you know, you're always going to need an overplay. But when you get to this highest elevated point, that is going to be, you know, the most complicated and pretty much the most that you'll need to play a side wind. So let's start to talk a little bit about headwinds because it's kind of going to make things a little bit more complicated as well. So with the headwind case, you know, let's come back and do this. You know, I'll kind of highlight this one for this in this case. And let's say, you know, we're pulling up this way. Again, we're going to be moving to higher ground. Moving to higher ground is going to make the ball land longer. However, this is kind of an isolated case because this time we have a headwind. So in the headwind, it's kind of going to negate itself. So I won't need to really pull this one up because you can see how this one needed to pull down. So the same theory should apply that I would need to pull this down. However, we don't have to worry about it extra launching because the wind is resisting it from landing long. So it's going to keep resisting. The harder that the wind tries to, the ball tries to go farther, the wind's going to kind of resist it from getting to that point. So it's usually not going to land long. So in this one kind of isolated case here, you really won't need to shift your wind, you know, down in this situation, even though you're going to higher ground. So you could pretty much just adjust, you know, and in this case, you know, you're going to start to need to, you know, really increase things a little bit. So maybe max plus 50, I'm thinking. So let's take a look at this, what max plus 50 looks like, you know, getting close to 11 rings for a 10. And you're really going to need to start to stop cranking down the, you might need 2 backspin in this situation, maybe even 1. Because here's what's going to end up happening. No matter what, you pretty much have to use a lot of curl on this one. So let me set up my curl thing here. You're pretty much always going to at least do this much right here. There's almost no situation where you won't use this other than this blue case. So in the blue case, it's kind of the only time where you're going to kind of maybe just keep it right around here. Very, very close. Everything else, this purple, and this purple one's going to, really want, kind of way over here. And similar with this red, but this red's going to be a little bit more challenging. So in this red situation here, what's going to end up happening, you have a headwind and you start to curl it. So the curl is going to be coming back straight into the wind. So when it's coming back straight into the wind, you really need to take off some more of that topspin. So when you apply all this curl, in this isolated case, I would say, this is going to, it's almost treated like this case right here, the straight into the headwind. So there's going to be times where you might need to use 0 topspin in this situation, depending on how strong that wind gets. So if that wind gets up there, 13, 14 miles per hour, you need to go 14 rings, for instance, then you need to start to think, about using, perhaps 0, on your spin for that case. How did I get purple? So in that isolated type case, you'll have to think about really negating some of that, because when you, as I mentioned, when you do that curl, it's essentially that curl applied is kind of going straight into the wind as opposed to being at an angle anymore. So the curl applied is essentially behaving like straight into the face. So it really does start to make things a little bit more complicated. And, those are pretty much the hardest cases. Now, what I'll also do, there's another shot that I can make you guys aware of. So let me go blue down here. And it's kind of towards this rock. You'll see from time to time I might get this tailwind right here, or similar version. And right at this max, power 3, is kind of perfect for roughly maybe 12 to 13 miles per hour on Sniper 10. So right at this max, I could essentially just put it on these rocks, play the wind, and, make sure that my angle or whatever, because I'm going to need some curl, so I'll need to make sure that this angle's kind of towards the, where I'm playing it, it's kind of in plane with the right-hand side of this fairway, and then I'm going to have to do this max curl shot, for instance. And when I apply this max curl shot, it's going to start to pull it over towards the center of that fairway. So, and as I mentioned, 12 to 13 miles per hour is going to be pretty perfect, and right around 3 or so backspin. And similarly, you can do this with this, but you'll need to do, much less curl. But if you're coming down this way, it's gonna behave very similarly. If you're aiming this, and since you won't need the curl, you'll just kind of aim it straight up down the fairway. And as I mentioned, it'll kind of almost be perfect for, 12, 13 miles per hour, somewhere in there. So that means if the wind's smaller, you need to do just a little bit of overpower. If the wind is larger for whatever reason, it shouldn't really be too much larger than this, but you might have to start pulling off of these rocks just a couple rings, like 2 or 3 rings maybe. So now that we've covered that one, let's start to talk about this other shot here. I don't have any yellow ones yet. That's good. So you want to land pretty left of this fairway. That there is kind of a ridge down the middle here a little bit. So you want to kind of get on the left-hand side of that, and your hops are kind of gonna kind of be funky, but you'll try to get that second hop right around the fringe or so, and then just kind of cut it. You'll always use max curl for the most part, unless this wind was straight over towards the side. But this is another shot that you can go. And you know, the ring adjustment that you're going to need to go, it's going to be quite aggressive as well. Very substantial ring adjustment, at least plus 50, plus 60% in this case. You know, it's going to be very, very aggressive type. So in this situation, let's take a look at this. You know, let's say this is a side. Let's go max plus 60, and this is, you know, just kind of a ballpark it. And what's nice about this is you should always kind of stay on the same plane. Now, if I get a wind like this, for instance, you know, it's going to be really hard to do this shot. You're never going to get it back to the pin with a Thor's hammer. And you will never have enough backspin, because ideally for this shot, this side wind scenario, we're going to be looking at, you know, at least 8 to 9 on your spin. And the only way that it's going to change would be, you know, slight fraction changes of the wind. Let's say it's a tailwind, just slightly, then you can just crank it up to 9. Let's say it's a little bit of a headwind, you'll start to come off of it a little bit. But it's also going to be very fairway specific. If you're not good with where you landed on the fairway, it's just going to be a nightmare. And you're not going to, you know, even with the proper 8 to 9, it still won't even be close. So this is a very, very challenging hole, as I stated here. And let's, you know, I forgot to draw this last case in. But in this situation, you know, this was just kind of at this tailwind, this specific one with the wood case, you know, it's basically just going to be essentially, you know, just put it at the max line. Like don't hit max, but you're essentially just adjusting from this max line in this situation. So let me just make sure that I have that case written in there, and hopefully you understand what that means. If not, you know, go back and replay, and you know, you're just going to kind of need to just kind of set it there at that max situation. So what haven't I covered yet? The headwinds we're pretty good on. With this one headwind, so if we got straight on headwind back here, you know, we're going to need max plus, you know, maybe even 100%. You're pretty much going to want to just basically put this out as far as you can. And what is max plus 100%? You know, it's probably going to be 20. It should be 20-ish rings, or no, not 20-ish rings, because it's just double whatever 50 is. So you can see that, you know, it'll be a quite substantial type ring adjustment here. So, you know, the headwind's going to kind of somewhere be in that range, somewhere inside of it. And I know that's not very specific at all, but that's just kind of how you got to play it. And, you know, that's sometimes why I, you know, start the lean. If I can get this side wind, or, you know, kind of a side angled, and just be able to pull it off to this fairway, sometimes I'll do that just in case, you know, my opponent, you know, tries to go for this shot, makes a mistake, and, you know, hits somewhere in this rough down here or in the bunker. Me going up here and just hitting that fairway should be enough to secure the win. Just by hitting the fairway, that's all I have to do. So, you know, just something to be thinking about for that hole. Let me talk a little bit about, so the tailwind's going to be a little bit tougher for this. You're still going to need to, you know, do this same type of over adjustment, you know, max plus 50, max plus 60, somewhere in this for this tailwind. It's going to be extremely hard to pull this shot off. I don't, you know, I'd really, you know, caution you guys. Let me put like an exclamation point here. Use that with caution, because you're never going to be able to stop the ball. Okay, so if you do this shot, it's going to land back here, hopefully short of the out of bounds, but not necessarily. You're really going to need that 9 backspin. So really use that tailwind case with a, and never go for it with the headwind. You know, with the headwind, we're pretty much going to try to do this island hop here. So I know there's a lot to, you know, take in. The best advice I have for you guys is just to play it a couple times. Well, first, you know, watch this video in its entirety. play it a couple times, start to get a feel for it, and then maybe just come back to the video and maybe as I was going over a certain case, maybe just kind of, parallel what you did with the video and just try to see, how you could change or whatever to fix for next time. So good luck, guys, and see you guys on the next video.